step by step. Hey, this is Lisa Robbin Young, and welcome to Creative Freedom. This is your dose of education and inspiration to help you build a noble empire and live an inspired life without selling your soul. Now, I got an email from a reader recently, and something she said stuck out to me. She wrote, "These days, my short-term goals have rather overshadowed my longer-term dream goals. I have a challenging family arrangement, and I'm working on recovering from some health stuff with not very much support. I feel like I'm on the right track for getting physically, emotionally, and relationally healthy, but I'm not sure how to go from flowering where I'm planted to becoming my own dream garden. Right now, I have family depending on my income, and I depend on having group health insurance. Part of me wonders how much I'm clinging to being needed as a reason to not pursue a dream job. Then again, not actually sure what that dream job would be." If you find yourself clinging to the stability of your current work, but yearning to make the big leap to your dream garden full time, one thing that might help you to avoid some of the overwhelm is to remember how a real garden grows. This is the time of year when our backyard garden is throwing out all kinds of fruits and vegetables. But like the old saying goes, to everything there is a season. When we started backyard gardening a few years ago, we started with one raised bed, then another, then another. We had 3 beds before we moved, and then over time we've added a few more. But we also learned how to use the naturalized spaces on our property so that we didn't have to keep building raised beds for all our plants. But every dream garden begins one plant at a time. Even with a wild garden, the seeds take time to spread, germinate, grow, pollinate, and then spread some more. This reminded me of a story you may have heard before. It was written by Geraldine Edwards back in the 90s about her trip with her daughter to see a daffodil garden. It's been passed around the internet for years, and Geraldine published a picture book in 2004 featuring the story about a gorgeous field of daffodils on a California hillside planted by one woman by hand over the course of several decades. But what you might not know is that it's a true story about Jean Bauer and her daffodil garden in Running Springs, California. In the 1950s, Jean and her husband Dale purchased a tract of land to build a small summer cabin. A neighbor had these beautiful flowers, and Jane wanted them in her yard, but she didn't know anything about flowers, didn't know what they were, and then later discovered they were daffodils. So in the fall of 1957, she started with just 50 bulbs, planting them one at a time in the dirt. She didn't even know which end was up. Plus, this was her summer cabin, so it was a very part-time gig, if you get what I'm saying. Every year she returned in the summer and planted more, until eventually Jean and Dale retired to the property with a massive garden that they opened to the public. People started coming from all over the world to see this work of art that she'd been creating. Now, the garden's closed now because the Bowers are approaching their 90s. But from the first bulb to the last, well over 1 million bulbs have been planted, one at a time, by one woman. As she said, with 2 hands, 2 feet, and very little brain. No fertilizing, no artificial watering. This was as natural a garden as Jean Bauer could create. Now, I don't know about the very little brain part, because her passion for the mighty daffodil has inspired at least as many people as there are blooms in her yard. Geraldine Edwards wrote about what she called the daffodil principle, which is why I keep one. The idea that long-term success comes from taking the time to do one thing, even in baby steps if you have to build a legacy that spans decades. Jean started with just 50 bulbs. One year she planted as many as 35,000, but they were all planted by hand, and she always worked uphill, planting these waves of color before she ever put the bulbs in the earth. So she made a plan. She worked the plan, one bulb at a time, and she didn't artificially accelerate her progress. She just showed up every year and did the work that was in front of her to do. She stayed consistent, and she created a world-renowned legacy in her wake. Now, I'm going to summon the great and powerful new kids on the block for this week's musical reminder.
Step by step. Ooh, girl, I really think it's just a matter of time.
Now, if that were the end of the story, that would be plenty, right? We've gotten lots of great information and inspiration already, but there's more, because in 1997, Some 40 years into her project, the mill fire leveled trees and blackened the landscape. Dun, dun, dun! Oh, the horror! All that work down the drain, right? Wrong. As Jean herself said, two aspects of the fire were beneficial to the bulbs. The resulting ash acted as a soil nutrient, and the unfortunate loss of the huge dead ponderosa and coulter pines allowed more sunshine into the area. What a great positive attitude, right? The flowers bloomed and grew just as wonderful as before, maybe even more so since daffodils love sunshine, right? Well, just a few years later, the willow fire of 1999 destroyed the Bower home. Oh, come on! Can't they catch a break? Well, Dale was an architect by trade. So after the fire, Jean and Dale were able to design and build their dream home, where their little summer retirement cabin once stood. Then, after years of sharing their gift with the public, they closed the garden and officially retired in 2009. So in the end, what looked like possible tragedy was actually a blessing. They got everything they wanted and more, and they did it one bulb at a time. The story of Jean and Dale Bower is ripe with all kinds of nuggets of wisdom, but I'll let Jean sum it up in her own words. What began in ignorance expanded into a 49-year educational odyssey. 49 years ago, it was all mine. Today, it seems to belong to the world. Indeed. So instead of thinking about your dream garden and getting overwhelmed, ask yourself, what bulb am I planting and nurturing today? If you're interested in learning more about this fascinating story, including directions on how to make your own origami daffodil, check out my website for pictures, links, and more details. So now let me hear from you. What bulbs are you planting and nurturing to move closer to your dreams? What steps are you taking, no matter how small, even if they seem super tiny? Remember, one person's baby step is another person's giant leap. Share your thoughts and your ideas in the comments, and let's be a rising tide for everyone. If you like this video and want to be the first to see more just like it, then subscribe to my channel and share me around with your friends, because we're good to the last drop. And there's always more where this came from. For inspiring songs, stories, and resources to help you build a noble empire and live an inspired life without selling your soul, come on, see what's shaking over at LisaRobbinYoung.com. You know you want to.